It was a freezing winter afternoon when I saw him sitting there on that bench, shivering in a thin coat, looking lost in thought. I couldn't just let him suffer, not while I had these warm boots on my feet. The city around me was bustling, people rushing by in their thick jackets, the cold air biting at anyone who dared to linger too long. I was heading home after another long day of struggling to make ends meet, but there was something about this stranger that made me stop in my tracks. He looked like he could use a bit of warmth, a little kindness. The thought crossed my mind for just a moment, but it was enough. I walked over and offered him my boots, knowing full well they were the only ones that kept my feet warm, the only pair that had seen me through the past few months of rough patches. He looked up at me, eyes wide with surprise. I wasn't expecting gratitude, not really, but I had hoped for something more than the cold stare he gave me. I didn't care though. He was just a stranger, and I wasn't expecting anything in return. I was used to being overlooked, used to being the one who gave when no one else would. Maybe it was naive, but that's who I was. I handed him my boots, and without a word, he took them. He didn't ask for my name, didn't offer his. The whole exchange was quick, almost mechanical, but somehow, it felt like the right thing to do. After a few minutes, he stood up, pulling the boots on as if they were just another piece of clothing, no sense of obligation in his actions. He gave me a curt nod and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I watched him go, wondering what his story was, but it didn't really matter. I had done what I thought was right. Little did I know, that simple act of kindness would change my life forever. The next day, a local news article caught my eye. It was a feature on a tech billionaire who had just made a significant donation to a local charity. The name seemed familiar, and as I read on, my heart stopped. The picture of the man in the article was unmistakable. It was him, the stranger from the bench. David Bennett. I couldn't believe it. How had I not recognized him? A billionaire, and yet, I had just handed him my boots as if he were just another cold soul on the street. It felt surreal. What were the chances? My mind raced. Why hadn't he mentioned anything? Why hadn't he at least thanked me properly? But maybe, just maybe, that was the whole point. He hadn't needed anything. He had everything. But me, I had nothing. And yet, I had given him my warmth without hesitation. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the man I had helped was one of the wealthiest men in the country, and I hadn't even known it. I couldn't shake the thought of how small the world really was, how one small act of kindness could ripple through the most unexpected places. But there was something else in that article that lingered in my mind. A line about how he had been touched by the kindness of a stranger. I never imagined it would be me. But there it was, in black and white, a reminder of how the smallest gestures could lead to something far bigger than I could ever imagine. I couldn't stop thinking about him. David Bennett, the man I had given my boots to, not knowing who he really was. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my mind. The surprise in his eyes when I handed him the boots, the way he just took them without hesitation, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had hoped he would have said something, maybe thanked me, or at least acknowledged what I did for him. But no, he just left, like it was nothing. I was left sitting there, with nothing but my worn-out shoes, the cold creeping in, and the question lingering in my mind. Why had I given him my boots in the first place? It wasn't as if I had an abundance of warmth to share. I barely had enough to keep myself going. But something in me had made the choice to help him, even though I knew he wasn't going to return the favor. The truth is, I didn't expect anything. That's just who I was. I had always been the one to give, to sacrifice, to put others first. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I went about my life as usual, struggling with bills, with the rent, with my art, and the weight of all the things I hadn't achieved. It was a constant fight to make ends meet. But that moment with David, it stayed with me. A strange, nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this world than what I could see from my little apartment. I didn't know if it was hope or foolishness, but I kept wondering if that encounter would somehow change things. Then, one morning, as I sat at my kitchen table sipping my coffee, I glanced at my phone and saw an alert from the local news. It was a headline about David Bennett, the billionaire, and his latest charitable donation. I froze. The article mentioned how he had donated millions to support local artists. It didn't take long for me to connect the dots. The man I had helped, the stranger I had met on the frozen bench, was now in the news, making waves with his generosity. My heart raced. Why hadn't he said anything to me? Why hadn't he offered to help me in any way? I had given him my boots, after all, but there was no mention of me in the article. No recognition of my small act of kindness. It hit me hard. I had helped him, and yet, he hadn't even acknowledged it. But I didn't let that stop me. No, I refused to feel sorry for myself. I had done something good, and that was enough. I wouldn't let anyone make me feel small for it. What happened next, though, was something I never could have predicted. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected invitation to an art show. It was from a local gallery that I had been dreaming of showcasing my work at for years. My heart skipped a beat when I saw David Bennett's name attached to the invitation. There was a note on the card. You're invited to an exclusive event featuring local artists, including Sarah Miller. I hope you can make it. The words felt like a punch to the stomach. I hadn't even known he was interested in my art. How could he be? We'd only met once, and that had been a brief exchange. But somehow, his name was there, written on the invitation like it was meant for me. My hands shook as I held the card in my hand, wondering if this was some sort of cruel joke. Had he really seen my work? Had he remembered me? Or was this just another instance of life handing me a glimmer of hope, only to snatch it away at the last moment? I didn't know what to think. But one thing was certain, this was my chance. My chance to prove that I wasn't just some invisible woman in the crowd, waiting for something to change. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment that would change everything. I took a deep breath, folded the invitation, and tucked it into my bag. I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The event was in a few days, and I was determined to make it there, no matter what. The night of the art show arrived faster than I expected. I could barely contain the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me as I dressed in my best clothes, the ones I had saved for special occasions. A simple black dress, not too fancy, just enough to show that I belonged. I took a deep breath as I stared at myself in the mirror. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to walk into a room full of wealthy, influential people and pretend that I fit in? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to try. I grabbed the invitation from my bag and slipped it into my coat pocket, my fingers trembling slightly. As I walked out the door, I felt a sense of anticipation building in my chest. The gallery was only a short drive away, but it felt like an eternity. I couldn't help but wonder how David Bennett had found my work. What was it about that brief encounter on the bench that had led to this moment? It didn't make sense, but I wasn't about to question it. The event was held in a sleek, modern gallery downtown. When I arrived, the place was already buzzing with activity. People in designer clothes stood around, sipping wine and talking in hushed tones. I felt out of place, my simple dress and flat shoes a stark contrast to the high-end fashion that surrounded me. The walls were lined with beautiful, expensive-looking art, but none of it stood out to me. My eyes scanned the room, looking for a familiar face, and then I saw him, David Bennett. He was standing by a large painting, talking to a group of people. His presence was commanding, and for a moment, I felt small. But then something shifted inside me. I had earned my place here. I wasn't some charity case, waiting for a handout. I had worked hard for this moment, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel like I didn't belong. I took a deep breath and walked over to him. As I approached, David looked up and his eyes met mine. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "I'm glad you could make it." I smiled back, though it was more out of nerves than confidence. "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't sure if it was real or if I was just imagining things. He chuckled softly. "It's real, I assure you. I've been following your work for a while now. Your art has a unique perspective." I felt a rush of warmth in my chest. He had seen my work. He had noticed me. I hadn't imagined it after all. "I'm honored," I said, suddenly feeling like the room wasn't so intimidating anymore. "I've always believed in the power of art to change lives," he continued. "And I think you're on the verge of something special." The words hung in the air between us, and I could feel the weight of them settling deep inside me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment that would change everything. As the night wore on, David introduced me to other guests, some of whom were collectors and gallery owners. I was both humbled and overwhelmed by the attention, but I kept my composure. By the end of the night, my name was on the lips of more than one important person in the art world. As I was about to leave, David stopped me. "I'd like to talk to you more about your work, Sarah. Maybe we could meet for lunch sometime." My heart skipped a beat. Was this real? Or was I dreaming? I'd like that, I said, trying to keep my voice from betraying my excitement. As I walked out of the gallery, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come. From the frozen bench to standing in front of a billionaire, my life had shifted in a way I never could have imagined. And it all started with one simple, selfless act of kindness. A few days after the art show, I received a message from David. It was simple, just a time and place to meet for lunch, but the excitement that surged through me felt anything but simple. I had been living in the quiet hum of my small apartment, working on my art, hoping for recognition. But this was more than I could have ever imagined. When I arrived at the restaurant, I was surprised to find it was one of the most upscale places in the city, with polished marble floors and soft, ambient lighting. I had never been to a place like this. It was the kind of restaurant where the waiters wore suits and the patrons spoke in hushed tones, as if they were all part of some exclusive club. I felt out of place, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was here for a reason, and that reason was bigger than my insecurities. David was already seated at a table in the corner, looking completely at ease. He stood when he saw me and smiled, the warmth in his expression immediately putting me at ease. "Sarah, I'm glad you could make it," he said, his voice deep and inviting. I took a seat across from him, trying to steady my nerves. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. I wasn't sure if this was a real offer or if I was just dreaming. He chuckled softly, the sound light and easy. "It's real, I assure you. I've been following your work for some time now, and I think you have something special." His words made my heart skip. It was one thing to be noticed, but another to be praised by someone who had the power to change your life. I looked down at my hands, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. I don't know what to say, I admitted. I never imagined my work would get this kind of attention. I'm just trying to make it, trying to survive and do what I love. David leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I understand, but I think you deserve more than just survival. I think you deserve to thrive." His words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It felt too big, too unreal. How had I gone from offering my boots to a stranger to sitting here with a billionaire, talking about success? "I've been in your shoes," David continued, his tone softening. "When I started, I had nothing. No connections, no wealth. Just a dream. It took time, and it took a lot of hard work. But I never gave up. And neither should you." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't just about making it in the art world. It was about perseverance. I had always known that, but hearing it from him, someone who had built an empire from the ground up, made it feel possible. "I want to help you, Sarah," he said suddenly, his voice serious. "I believe in you and your art. I think we can do something great together." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "I want to offer you a grant to fund your next exhibition. You'll have the resources to do what you've always dreamed of. No strings attached. Just a chance to create without worry." I stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. This wasn't just a handout. It was an opportunity, an open door to a future I had only dreamed of. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to say. "Of course," he replied, his smile never fading. "I've seen what you can do, Sarah, and I want to see more." My mind raced. This was it. This was the break I had been waiting for. Everything I had worked for, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, had led to this moment. It felt like a dream, but it was real. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means to me." He nodded, his expression softening. "I'm just getting started. Let's make your art known, Sarah. Let's make it something unforgettable." As we continued to talk, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude that ran deeper than words could express. This was more than just about money or success. It was about believing in something bigger than myself and finding someone who saw that in me. I had offered him my boots, never expecting anything in return, but somehow, that small act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would change my life forever. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of new beginnings and unexpected turns. I spent my days preparing for my upcoming exhibition, pouring everything I had into my art. The grant David had offered allowed me to create without the constant worry of finances looming over me. For the first time in years, I could focus entirely on my work. But despite the excitement, a quiet unease lingered in the back of my mind. As I stood in my studio, surrounded by canvases and half-finished pieces, I couldn't help but wonder, what did David truly want from me? Why had he been so kind? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't know much about him, beyond the fact that he was a billionaire and seemed to take a genuine interest in my art. But there was something about the way he looked at me, something in the way he listened when I spoke about my dreams and struggles, that made me feel like there was more to our connection than just business. One afternoon, I sat in a coffee shop, my sketchbook open in front of me, but my mind far from the page. I was lost in thought when my phone buzzed. It was a text from David. "How about a coffee tomorrow? I'd love to catch up and talk about how everything is going." My heart skipped a beat. It was odd. Really. He had helped me so much already, and yet he still wanted to meet, still wanted to check in. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed. The next day, we met at a quiet cafe. David was dressed casually, much more relaxed than the first time I had seen him, but still carrying that air of authority that seemed to follow him wherever he went. As we sat down with our drinks, he asked how things were progressing with my exhibition. I told him that I felt like I was finally getting somewhere, but there was still a part of me that wondered if I was truly ready. "It's not about being ready," David said, leaning forward, his eyes focused on mine. "It's about taking the leap, about trusting yourself. You've been given the opportunity, Sarah. Don't waste it." His words hit me harder than I expected. He was right, of course. I had been given a chance, a real chance, and I couldn't let fear hold me back now. But there was something else, something unspoken that hung between us. I had started to think that maybe David saw something in me that I hadn't even realized about myself. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to this connection than I had initially thought. As the conversation continued, I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't expected. We talked about our lives, our dreams, and the paths that had brought us here. I could sense that David was not just the successful businessman he appeared to be, but someone who had experienced his own share of struggles and setbacks. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the gallery, about how you wanted to make a difference, to leave a legacy. I believe you can do that. I believe you will." I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. He didn't have to say those things. He didn't have to believe in me the way he did. But he did, and it made all the difference. That afternoon, I left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just an artist anymore. I was someone with a vision, someone who had the chance to change the world, even if it was in my own small way. And that was something worth fighting for. As the days passed, I worked harder than ever, each brushstroke feeling more purposeful than the last. I knew that no matter where this journey would take me, I had already taken the first step toward a future I had once only dreamed of. And it all began with a simple act of kindness on a cold bench. The day of the exhibition finally arrived. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for, the opportunity one had dreamed of for so long. As I walked into the gallery, the walls were lined with my paintings, each one a reflection of my journey, my struggles, and my triumphs. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw people admiring the work, discussing the meaning behind each piece. For a moment, I felt like I was living someone else's life, like this couldn't possibly be real. I had come from a place where I barely had enough to survive, to this, an exhibition that people were actually talking about. But as much as I felt proud of what I had accomplished, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. It was as if every brushstroke on the canvas was a part of me, a piece of my soul that I had exposed for the world to see. And now, I was waiting for the moment when everything would either fall into place or come crashing down. It wasn't just about the art. It was about proving to myself that I could make it, that I was worth something beyond the struggles I had endured. The night went on, and the room continued to fill with people. I could hear murmurs of admiration, whispers about how the work was innovative and raw. But it wasn't until I spotted David in the crowd that I truly felt seen. He was talking to a couple of art collectors, but when his eyes met mine, he gave me a smile that made my heart skip a beat. He made his way toward me, his presence somehow filling the space, even though there were other people around. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm as always, "I'm so proud of what you've done. These pieces are incredible. They really capture something real." I felt a rush of warmth spread through me at his words. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I didn't expect this to happen. I didn't think I would get this far. You've earned it, he replied. You have a gift, Sarah. And this is just the beginning. The world needs to see more of it. His words meant more to me than I could express. He didn't just see me as another artist in the crowd. He saw the effort I had put in, the long nights, the uncertainty, the fear. He saw me. And in that moment, I realized that everything I had gone through, every hardship, every sacrifice, had led me here. It was no longer about the boots I had given to a stranger on a frozen bench. It was about the life I was building, the legacy I was creating. As the night came to a close, I stood back and looked around at the crowd. People were discussing the pieces, taking photographs, making connections. I felt a sense of pride swell in my chest, knowing that my art had made an impact. And then, just as I was about to leave, David found me again. I want to talk about the future, Sarah. I believe you have the potential to reach so many more people with your work. Let's make sure you get there. My heart raced. Was this the next step? Was this really happening? I would love that, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this chance slip through my fingers. I had worked too hard to let fear stop me now. As I left the gallery that night, the weight of the evening's events settled in. I had come so far, and yet, I knew there was so much more to do. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The days following the exhibition felt like a blur, filled with phone calls, emails, and meetings. My artwork was being recognized, and people were starting to take me seriously. I was invited to galleries, my work was being discussed in art circles, and collectors were interested. It was everything I had ever wanted, and yet, there was still something missing. It wasn't about the fame or the money. No, it was something deeper. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt like there was still something I needed to prove, to myself, more than anyone else. As I continued to work on new pieces for upcoming shows, I found myself thinking back to the moment when I had first met David. That unexpected encounter on the bench, the kindness I had shown, and how it had led to this. What had made him choose to help me? What was his real intention? I hadn't really asked him about it before, but now, as I sat in my studio surrounded by my work, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I still didn't know everything about him. Our conversations had always been focused on my art, my future, but I realized I knew very little about his past, his life beyond the billionaire persona. I decided it was time to find out. A few days later, I sent him a message. It was simple, just a request to meet for coffee, nothing too formal. I wanted to know more about him, about why he had believed in me when no one else had. He agreed right away, and we set up a time to meet. The coffee shop was quiet when I arrived. I sat at a small table by the window, waiting. When David walked in, he immediately spotted me and made his way over. He greeted me with his usual warmth, but this time, there was something different in his eyes, a sort of openness, as if he knew what was coming. I've been thinking about our conversation at the gallery, he said as we sat down. I know I've helped you a lot, but I haven't really shared much about myself, have I? I shook my head, not sure where this conversation was headed. I've always been a private person, he continued, but I think it's time I told you why I've been so invested in your success. It's not just about your art. It's about you, Sarah. You remind me of myself when I was starting out. I didn't have anyone who believed in me, and I had to fight for every inch of success I achieved. But when I saw you, saw how hard you worked, how you didn't let anything stop you, I saw something in you that I hadn't seen in a long time. It's why I wanted to help you. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had always assumed he was helping me because of my art, but hearing him speak like this, I realized it was more personal. He wasn't just investing in a painter. He was investing in a person who had the same kind of drive and determination that he had once had. I didn't know, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize I reminded you of yourself. He smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. You don't have to know everything about me, Sarah, but I want you to. Know that I believe in you, and I think you'll go far, further than you even realize right now. As we continued to talk, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about something much bigger, about the connections we form with others and how those connections can change the course of our lives. After that conversation, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The doubts I had been carrying around started to fade. I wasn't just an artist trying to make it in a world that didn't seem to care. I was someone who had been given a chance, a real chance to succeed. And with that, I knew I could no longer let fear control me. I had come this far, and I wasn't going to stop now. As the weeks passed, I started to feel a shift within myself. The uncertainty that had plagued me for so long was gradually replaced by a sense of purpose. My art was gaining recognition, but more importantly, I was beginning to see my own worth. The grant from David had opened doors for me, but it was the belief he had shown in me that had truly made the difference. I no longer felt like I was just scraping by, hoping for a chance. I realized that I had been given that chance, and now it was up to me to make the most of it. I threw myself into my work with more determination than ever. Each canvas became a piece of my soul, a reflection of the journey I had been on. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I questioned myself, when the fear of failure crept in. But I kept going, remembering David's words, "You have a gift. The world needs to see more of it." I was determined to make that happen. As I prepared for my next exhibition, I received an invitation to a prestigious art auction. It was an opportunity one never would have imagined for myself just a few months ago. The thought of my work being displayed alongside renowned artists was both exciting and overwhelming. But I knew I had to go. I couldn't let fear hold me back. The night of the auction, I dressed in my best outfit, my heart pounding with anticipation. The venue was grand, filled with people who seemed to glide effortlessly through the space. It was a world I had never been a part of, and yet, here I was, standing in the middle of it. As I walked through the crowd, I spotted David across the room, talking to a group of buyers. When he saw me, his face lit up with that same warmth that had always made me feel seen. "Sarah," he said, walking over to me. "I knew you'd be here. This is your moment." His words were like a quiet affirmation of everything I had worked for. It was easy to forget how far I had come, but moments like this reminded me of the journey. "I can't believe this is happening," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's all happening because you believed in me," I added, my eyes meeting his. David smiled, but there was a certain sadness in his gaze. "It's not just me, Sarah," he said, his voice softening. "You believed in yourself first. That's the key." I nodded, realizing how true his words were. I had spent so many years doubting myself, waiting for someone else to see my potential. But it was only when I started to believe in myself that things began to change. The auction went on, and as the night drew to a close, I found myself standing in front of a group of collectors who were interested in my work. It was surreal. It wasn't just the recognition that felt so extraordinary, but the realization that my art had the power to move people, to connect with them on a deep level. By the end of the evening, one of my pieces had sold for a price that I never could have imagined. The joy and disbelief that washed over me were overwhelming. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the validation, the affirmation that I had made it. I had stepped into a world that had once felt so distant, so out of reach. But now, it felt like I belonged. That night, as I drove home, I reflected on everything that had led me to this point. The frozen bench, the boots, David's belief in me. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. But it was also the beginning of something new. I had taken a chance on myself, and it had paid off. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first met David. I was stronger, more confident, and more certain of my own worth. And I knew that this was only the beginning. The months that followed were filled with a sense of achievement, but also a quiet reflection. My art had taken off in ways I could never have imagined. Exhibitions, sales, and even more opportunities to showcase my work kept coming, and each step I took felt like a new chapter of my life. But there was a part of me that hadn't fully let go of the past, the feeling of uncertainty, the nagging thought that somehow I wasn't deserving of all this success. It was a struggle I hadn't expected. Despite all the outward accomplishments, I still found myself doubting whether I truly belonged in this world of high-profile galleries and well-known collectors. It wasn't until I met with David again, this time for lunch at a quiet spot in the city, that I realized how much I had changed. He had been a constant presence, not just as a supporter, but as someone who genuinely cared about my journey. "You've done amazing things, Sarah," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "But I want you to remember that you got here because you believed in yourself. I only helped you see what was already there." His words had always carried weight, but that day, they resonated with me in a deeper way. I had been too focused on the fear of not measuring up, of not being enough, that I had forgotten the most important part of the journey. I had done the work. I had made the choice to rise above the hardships. I had chosen to move forward. I never thought I'd get here. I confessed, my voice soft. It feels like a dream sometimes. David smiled and nodded. I know, but that's the beauty of it. You made it real. The conversation shifted to other topics, future projects, upcoming opportunities, but in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. It wasn't about the recognition or the accolades. It was about the journey and the growth that came with it. The struggles I had faced, the doubts I had carried, had shaped me into the person I was today. And now, I was more confident than ever in my ability to continue building my career on my own terms. As we parted ways, David gave me one last piece of advice. Keep pushing forward, Sarah. There's always more to learn, more to experience. But never forget how far you've come. Walking away from that lunch, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I wasn't just an artist anymore. I was a creator with a purpose. My story had started with a small act of kindness on a frozen bench, but it had evolved into something much bigger, something I could truly be proud of. As I headed back to my studio, ready to work on my next piece, I realized that the journey was far from over. There would always be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt, but I knew now that I had the strength to face them. And this time, I wouldn't be running from my fears. I would embrace them. This was my life now, and I was ready for whatever came next.